I recently made a video about self-driving cars, and in it I compared my hometown in Canada to a similarly sized city here in the Netherlands. I wanted to take that segment out and talk about it here in its own video. Partially because it was 43 minutes through an almost hour-long video, so I'm not going to be upset if you missed it. But also because I think it deserves further discussion outside of the context of autonomous vehicles. Because while it may seem crazy to compare a car-centric city in Canada to this beautiful walkable city in the Netherlands, when you look at the history of these two places, you'll find they have a lot more in common than you think. I grew up in a car-dependent city called London, Ontario, Canada, and despite its Thames River, Oxford Street, and Covent Garden Market, it's nothing like real London. A kind of fake London, if you will. When I arrive in fake London by train, I'm on the side of a high-speed strode across from a surface parking lot. There isn't much left of downtown, and my only option to get anywhere is a taxi. The city is very spread out and designed almost exclusively for cars. Bus service is highly unreliable and slow, and there is no way I would feel safe enough to ride a bike here. And there are regular news stories about people being killed in car crashes, even when they're on the sidewalk. I have to drive pretty much everywhere to do pretty much anything, which I gotta say kinda sucks. I left fake London as soon as I was old enough, and I moved to various different cities and countries before ultimately moving our family to the Netherlands, where we plan to stay indefinitely. Which brings me to Utrecht. Utrecht is a city in the middle of the Netherlands, and I have to go there fairly regularly for one reason or another. The population is very similar to that of fake London, but otherwise these cities are very, very different. So you're probably thinking that it's almost comical to compare Utrecht to London, right? It seems ridiculous because these cities have almost nothing in common. And yet, 100 years ago, they were pretty similar. Sure, the architecture was different, but the fundamental design of the city was pretty comparable. Both were compact, walkable cities full of mixed-use neighborhoods and connected by streetcars, because both cities were founded long before automobiles were invented. Over the 20th century, both cities embraced the automobile, and both cities built wide roads and highways. Utrecht filled in a canal in their city center and turned it into a highway. And London bulldozed a neighborhood to build a wide road straight into downtown. Both cities even bulldozed part of their city center to build a suburban-style shopping mall, and these malls were both the first of their kind in their respective countries. Utrecht was about a decade behind London, but otherwise these cities were on exactly the same path. That is, until about the 1990s when Utrecht decided to change course due to growing concerns about the negative impact of car-centric development. They made a fundamental decision to make the city friendly to people walking and cycling, to reduce car traffic, and to create greener public spaces. The highway around the city center was turned back into a canal. You'd never know that this used to be a highway. And today, that downtown shopping center is connected directly to a new train station via a pedestrianized area, and closely integrated with the rest of the city center on the other side. It's such an incredible difference to arrive in this place by train compared to fake London. Despite having almost the same population as my hometown, it hosts the busiest train station in the Netherlands, transporting over 200,000 people per day, with over 1,000 daily departures to national and international destinations. Incidentally, the fake London train station has just 10 departures per day. There are hundreds of destinations within walking distance of the station, and there are great connections to other forms of public transit, including this new tram system. London had plans to build a new tram line a few years ago, but it was cancelled, in part because people believed that this city of 400,000 people was too small for a tram line, even though it had one 100 years ago. Underneath the train station in Utrecht is the world's largest bicycle parking garage with spaces for over 12,000 bicycles. And I can pick up one of the hundreds of rental bicycles using my transit card and cycle to any destination. I can cycle anywhere I want, quickly and easily, and because of the high-quality infrastructure, I never feel unsafe. It also helps that car volumes are low, and so are the speed limits. Near the train station is this street accessible only to walking, cycling, and public transit. This is one of the busiest cycling paths in the world, and I probably see more people cycling in 5 minutes here than I have in my entire life in fake London. Walking around the city is also convenient and comfortable. The streets are lined with interesting shops and restaurants, and there isn't a surface parking lot in sight anymore. There are many nice residential neighborhoods, and it's remarkably quiet too, because as I've realized over the years, cities aren't loud, cars are loud. There isn't a lot of traffic because there are viable alternatives to driving. People aren't forced to drive here, so the only people in cars are those who need to drive or those who really want to drive. Utrecht has many places that are off limits to cars, but motor vehicles are still extremely useful sometimes, so access is still provided for delivery trucks, emergency vehicles, and people with disabilities. I've been constantly told that we need to design for cars because of families, the disabled, or the elderly. And yet I see all of those people getting around just fine, because universal access to mobility isn't a fundamental issue. It's a problem caused by car dependency. Would this guy be better off in a car? Maybe. I didn't ask him. But it's not like he's unable to get around independently here, like would be the case where I'm from. Now, Utrecht isn't perfect, and the city still shows the scars of that 1960s car-centric development. But it is a city that is improving rapidly. It seems like every time I go there, there's some new project underway to make the city better. If you'd like to learn more, the channel Bicycle Dutch regularly makes videos about the improvements happening in Utrecht, and I'll leave a link in the description. Now, the immediate question that this comparison raises in the minds of most Canadians and Americans is, what should I do to repair my North American city? And the short answer is, join your local advocacy group or Strongtown's local conversation. Advocacy is local. The best way to repair your city entirely depends on where you live, the factors that affect your neighborhood, and ultimately, how much damage was done by car infrastructure. The correct approach for, say, a German living in Berlin would be completely different than an American living in Phoenix, which is why you shouldn't be getting your advice from YouTubers, Instagrammers, or TikTokers. You should be talking to your local advocacy groups. What I wouldn't recommend, though, is to blindly try to replicate what the Dutch did in the 1970s. First of all, the Dutch protests were not unique. For example, there's a lot of talk in urbanist circles about the Stop de Kindermoord protests in the Netherlands in the 1970s, when parents were angry that children were being killed by cars. But you hear almost nothing about the baby carriage blockades in the 1940s and 1950s in the United States that were done for exactly the same reason. The internet is full of these images of Amsterdam in the 60s versus Amsterdam today. The ones by Thomas Schleiper in particular are really great. And if your goal is to convince people that it is possible for cities to change for the better, as Brent often does, then this is fine, of course. But it's good to keep in mind that these images can be misleading and possibly even counterproductive when it comes to actually improving North American cities. I hate this image of Zijlstraat in Amsterdam in particular, especially when it's paired up with some nice street in Amsterdam today. Because for one, this was an unusually large traffic jam, likely because this bridge was open during rush hour. But more importantly, because Zijlstraat is almost exactly the same today, and it still sucks. There are certainly more people who cycle here than 40 years ago, and that's important, but the design of the street hasn't improved at all. I talked about this street 3 years ago in my Most Dangerous Places to Cycle in Amsterdam video, and it's one of the only streets I talked about that hasn't been improved since then. Like, seriously, Van Vouwstraat was also featured in that same video, but it's been recently blocked off to through traffic and the design is much better. It's genuinely nice to be on this street now. This image is actually accurate, though. This really does show a legitimate before and after of Eerste van der Heilstraat in de Pijp in Amsterdam. But this brings me to my next issue with these images, because when people online talk about Amsterdam in the 1970s, they almost exclusively talk about peaceful protest, which completely ignores the fact that a lot of the protests were not peaceful. The reason Amsterdam is as nice as it is today is because people literally fought for it, like got in fistfights in the streets. I've received a lot of criticism from American advocates especially that the tone of my YouTube videos is inappropriate and that I need to be nicer. Which makes me laugh every time, because I imagine the response from those same people if I said that they should try flipping cars on their side, spray painting car free on them, and using them to block the street. Because protests like that are why Ferdinand Bolstraat in de Pijp is almost completely car free today. Would I advocate for that? I mean, it would be really funny. But I'm not convinced that this approach would work in the North America of today. The truth is that the Dutch approach worked for many reasons. Some of it because of the tireless work of advocates and protesters, but also for economic, social, and political reasons, as well as good timing. Most notably, the oil crisis of the 1970s, where the government was forced to institute mandatory car-free days. If you're actually interested in this, there is this great paper that goes into more detail, link in the description. And I think it's important to understand this context because the North America of today is nothing like the Netherlands of the 1970s. There is a fundamental difference between fighting to keep your traditional neighborhood from being destroyed by car infrastructure versus trying to repair your city when downtown has been bulldozed to build surface parking lots, nobody has been allowed to live there for years due to exclusionary zoning, urban sprawl has been the only legal type of development for decades, public transportation is nearly useless, almost every household owns multiple pickup trucks or SUVs, and there is no one left alive who remembers what the city was like before it was overrun by cars. Which is why I don't make videos about how Amsterdam became bike-friendly. I make videos about strong towns and how car-dependent American-style suburbia is dangerous, unhealthy, financially insolvent, and in general, just a shitty way to live. So if you live in North America and you want your city to improve, then join Strong Towns and find a local safe streets or urbanist advocacy group in your city. Because they certainly exist, and they know a lot more about your neighborhood than some YouTuber. From there, you can do the second most important thing, which is to attend community engagement meetings about the changes happening in your area. This is important because otherwise the only people there will be a bunch of cranky boomers who only showed up because they have literally nothing better to do than to complain about parking. But beyond that, I'm not going to make any more specific recommendations because fundamentally, Not Just Bikes is not an advocacy channel. I was an advocate for many years, but that life is behind me now. Plus, about 2/3 of my audience isn't even from the US or Canada, and they have limited interest in American-centric topics. If that's the kind of content you want, that's great, but you should probably be watching a channel like Strong Towns if you want to learn more about North American advocacy. I'll put a link to their channel in the description. Now, despite the fact that I'm not personally interested in making American advocacy videos, I have heard from literally hundreds of people who were encouraged to become advocates because of my channel, and I love that. And Strong Towns have told me that Not Just Bikes has been a major source of new members for them, which is amazing. I've even had a significant number of people tell me that they've decided to study urban planning because of my videos, which I must admit makes me a little bit nervous because I've never studied urban planning or worked as an urban planner, so I'm not really sure what it's like to actually do that job. But then I remember reading that enrollment into archaeology programs spiked after the first Indiana Jones movie was released, and I suspect that those people were in for much more of a shock than any of my fans will be. From the very beginning of this channel, I did not want to be prescriptive. I don't know who you are, I don't know what your situation is, so I don't want to tell you what to do. My main goal with this channel has always been to talk about my personal experiences in cities. I enjoy making videos about great cities, talking about what makes them great and why I believe that they are better places to live. What you do with that information is really up to you. If you watch my videos and decide to become an advocate, that's great. The world needs more people like you. If you decide to move to a more walkable neighborhood nearby, fantastic. If you decide to pack up everything and take off to another country as I did, that's great too. And if you decide to collapse on the couch and cry yourself to sleep, well, personally, I think you should do something more productive with your limited time on this earth, but hey, you do you. I have to admit though, whenever I come back to my hometown, I get pretty upset. I think back to the photos of what it used to look like, and I feel like I was robbed. Because I was. We all were. Car infrastructure destroyed our cities. When I grew up, I couldn't wait to get out of fake London, to move somewhere better. And I spent so much of my life moving from place to place to find the one that was right for me. And when I finally found it, I wanted to share that knowledge with others so that they wouldn't have to spend as much time as I did to find their perfect place to live. Which is why the very first scene of the very first video on this channel was...
This is the video I wish I could have seen 20 years ago, as it would have saved me a lot of time figuring out where I wanted to live.
Which is here, in the Netherlands. And yet, that perfect place could have been the place I was born. But they destroyed it, so that suburbanites had somewhere to park. The citizens of Utrecht were lucky in that they were able to stop the damage before it could go too far. Because while cities can improve, the sad fact is that, barring some fundamental restructuring of our society, London will never be as good as Utrecht in my lifetime. And there's not much I can do about that. But what I can do is to show people how life can be better in cities designed for people. One genuinely good thing, though, is that there's a lot more quality urbanist content online than when I was learning these things. I often recommend City Beautiful, a professor of urban planning with a talent for teaching. CityNerd, a planner and engineer who masterfully delivers deadpan humor in highly researched videos. And RMTransit, a transportation consultant who knows more about public transit than anybody I've ever met. But there are many others that you'll discover as soon as the almighty algorithm finds out you like trains. If you're a Nebula subscriber, there's a whole section dedicated to urbanism that includes urbanist creators, but also individual videos by other creators about urbanist topics. And if you can, I'd really encourage you to watch these videos on Nebula because it directly supports the creators. This isn't an advertisement or a paid sponsorship, this is just fact. I would not be able to afford to make the videos that I do if it wasn't for the support that I get from Nebula. I have a Patreon page as well, and if you prefer Patreon, that's great, but I generally try to promote Nebula because I just think it's a better deal for my viewers. Because when you sign up to Nebula, you support this channel, but you also get access to the videos of over 200 other talented creators, all without any ads or sponsorships. And there's a growing library of Nebula Originals videos that are only available on Nebula. I recently teamed up with some very talented comedians to make a new comedy urbanism channel called I Love the City. It's a lot funnier than Not Just Bikes because other people write the jokes. I Love the City is produced with the help of Nebula, and every episode is published to Nebula first, before it's available anywhere else. And that brings me to my very favorite thing about Nebula. It's a creator-owned streaming service. It's not owned by venture capital firms, media conglomerates, or big tech, and it's not beholden to the whims of advertisers either. Which is why Nebula can support creators and provide a platform for them to make the videos they want to make without worrying about demonetization or algorithmic optimization. If you'd like to support a creator-owned streaming service and get access to some great videos in the process, then I'd encourage you to try Nebula. If you sign up at the link go.nebula.tv/notjustbikes, you'll get 40% off an annual subscription. And if you're looking for a last-minute gift idea, then Nebula now has gift cards as well, and my Dutch viewers will be glad to know that you can buy them with Ideal. You can even send one to yourself if you just want to sign up for Nebula using Ideal instead of a credit card. Thanks to everyone who supports this channel on Nebula, and thank you for watching.